Oil. It warms our homes, fuels our cars, and pollutes our water. Since its discovery, oil has asserted itself as an essential ingredient in energy production. But what is this miracle substance, and how do mistakes in its journey to become a finished product become a major threat to the environment? Oil is the product of millions of years of pressure and heat on organisms that have died years ago. After the organism's deaths, the creatures are encased in the ground where they are continuously buried under more and more layers of earth. This primordial parfait creates heat and pressure, which catalyzes the creation of kerogen molecules, which are made of hydrocarbon compounds. In a span of millions to tens of millions of years, the continuously growing heat and pressure causes the kerogen molecules' carbon bonds to break, producing the simple hydrocarbon molecules we all know as oil. Oil is obtained by drilling a hole in the ground and lowering a special chamber called an artificial lift into the hole. We then pump water and other chemicals into the well, which, combined with the oil, creates a drop in pressure that pushes the oil to the surface. This is called the Venturi effect. Once we have the oil above ground, we use a triplex to separate the oil from the other liquids in order to reuse that water chemical cocktail to continue the pumping cycle. Spills can occur throughout any point in the oil manufacturing process, such as erosion of oil storage containers or issues in construction or transportation. What happens when it spills? Oil floats and spreads quickly, blanketing water. Typically, crude oil, being denser, creates an oil slick, a thicker layer, whereas gasoline, diesel creates an oil sheen, a thinner layer on the water. What happens to the environment? Oil makes any land it touches toxic and clumps the sand and rocks of beaches together. Unfortunately, oil slicks and sheens mimic food, poisoning animals who ingest it. They may also ingest it in efforts to clean themselves. As oil evaporates, the fumes can cause lung damage and suffocation. Direct contact can result in eye irritation, burns, or, when absorbed into the skin, cause neurological and physiological problems. Most significantly, it hinders animals' waterproofing abilities. When the oil comes in contact with an animal's fur or feathers, it consumes the animal, matting their coat and hindering the coat's insulating properties, resulting in hypothermia. How do we clean up the mess we've made? Naturally, the ocean's waves break up oil. Industrially, we use floating booms to contain the spill. Skimmers, which skim the oil from the water, or sorbents, which, like sponges, absorb the oil from the water, can also be placed inside the booms. Machinery such as planes can also be used to spread chemical dispersants. Trucks can be equipped with hoses to push contaminated sand into the waves, or vacuums to pull oil from the water.
The Exxon Valdez oil spill occurred on March 23, 1989 in the Prince William Sound of Alaska, when the operator of the oil tanker scraped the vessel on Bligh Reef, spilling roughly 10.8 million gallons of crude oil into the Sound. At the time, it was the biggest oil spill in United States history. The crash resulted in no human deaths itself. However, 4 deaths resulted in the cleanup efforts of the oil, and numerous habitats and species were harmed as a result. The 3 main different cleanup efforts from the Exxon Valdez oil spill were mechanical, burning, and the use of chemical dispersants. The most effective method was the mechanical cleanup, which involves the use of booms and skimmers to separate the oil from the water. To add, the effects on wildlife proved to be drastic and deadly to many different species. Some of these species include seabirds, sea otters, harbor seals, bald eagles, herring, and orcas. The recovery period of animals depended on how much oil remained in their habitats following the spill, and how often the animals encounter oil. Although some species may have seemed to recover from the oil spill, some have not, such as the herring and killer whale. Also, as a result of the spill, the Prince William Sound and its surrounding area took a major hit in losses from the fishing and tourism industry, ultimately affecting the economy. As of 1990, 15,000 fishers in the area had lost their source of food, and 26,000 tourism jobs were lost, which resulted in a loss of $2.4 billion in sales. The hit is still inevitable today, as tourists still think the water is contaminated and no longer want to visit. The amount that Exxon had paid in order to try and reinstate the population simply wasn't enough, and resulted in billions of dollars in potential revenues for different industries. For example, one sea otter could be sold to a zoo for as much as $50,000. Multiply this by 2,800, and that's $140 million in lost revenue just from sea otters. Exxon, however, only paid $90,000 to rehabilitate the otters. To compensate for all the losses, Exxon spent $3.8 billion on the cleanup after the lawsuit was settled.
Now we're going to take a deeper look at the world's largest oil spill in the history of marine oil drilling, the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon oil rig was located in the Gulf of Mexico. On April 20th, 2010, an uncontrollable blowout caused an explosion on the rig that killed 11 crewmen and injured 17. On the night of the spill, a surge of methane blasted through the concrete core of the oil rig base. Too weak to withstand the pressure, The core fractured, allowing gas to travel up to the rig's platform. At this point, the rig ignited into inextinguishable flames lasting for 2 days. Finally, on the morning of April 22nd, the Deepwater Horizon rig capsized and sank. For 87 days, over 200 million gallons of crude oil was pumped into the Gulf. Though the rig was capped in 2010, oil is still washing up on the shore to this day. Currently, 60% of the crude oil remains unaccounted for. Spanning from Texas to Florida, 16,000 total miles of coastline was affected. In response to the spill, over 30,000 people worked together to collect oil, clean up beaches, and take care to animals. Negative health effects were also reported from 75% of the residents due to exposure to the oil. Also, as a result of the spill, shrimpers are now only catching 8% of their original catch in a week. These facts reveal the true and devastating impacts this oil had and are continuing to have on our environment. Just 6 months after the spill, over 8,000 birds, turtles, and mammals were reported dead. Many of these animals were already on the endangered species list. The BP Oil Company is responsible for close to $40 billion in fines, cleanup costs, and settlements, along with $16 billion due to the Clean Water Act. There were many cleanup methods used to tackle this oil spill, such as using dispersants, boomers and skimmers, and absorbents. The Deepwater oil spill has been described as the worst environmental disaster in the United States. This oil spill was almost 20 times greater than the estimate of the Exxon Valdez oil spill.
There are not many protective and preventative ways from these oil spills. However, in an attempt that focuses on the rescue aspect is Don's Wildlife Initiative. It was created in response to an oil spill in 1971 when 2 standard oil tankers collided in the San Francisco Bay. An incredible amount of oil was released into open water, which as a result killed thousands of animals and drastically affected the ecosystem. Since then, Don's Wildlife Initiative has partnered with the International Bird Rescue Research Center and the Marine Mammal Center. These partners inspire to educate the public about the health of animals, habitat conservation, and the treatment of oceans. During these 2 disastrous oil spills, Don has provided immediate assistance in the recovery efforts as well as raising money for their partners. Don's Wildlife Initiative had launched its new advertising campaign in mid-April of 2010, promoting its reputation as the soap of choice among non-profit groups that clean birds and marine mammals harmed by oil spills. The commercials showed birds and sea otters having oil cleaned off their feathers and fur by volunteers. Don effectively cut the rest of these types of advertisements and began to help with the response after the BP oil spill. A minimum of 12,000 bottles of Dawn soap were sent to the affected areas. Dawn was correct in their advertising campaign as their ingredients for their soap contain just the right amount of surfactants, which are cleaners that cut oil, able to clean the animals while still not irritating their skin. Coincidentally, around 1/7 of each bottle of Dawn soap is actually a petroleum substance itself. Dawn is reluctant to admit it, and unfortunately for the environment, the most efficient way to save it is by using more oil. After our research, we have come to the conclusion that our planet must find an alternative way to pump oil without putting the environment at such a risk.